Selner. I'm a second-year master's student at Clarkson University, and we've been working on the population ecology of Mooneye. So for those of you who don't know, what is a Mooneye? Their name Iodontrophesis refers to the toothed tongue, those bony protrusions you see on their tongue. They're a silvery, flat-bodied fish, usually about a foot long, and one of their notable characteristics is this large eye. But their population and their distribution has been in decline across New York State over the last several decades. But for some reason, the Oswegatchie River has been holding a pretty stable population of them. But not a lot is known about them, and we're not exactly sure why. So going into this project, we were hoping to establish a population distribution model, characterize their habitat and how they're using it, to identify that fish community surrounding the Mooneye, and to try to get a better understanding of their spawning habits and possibly spawning habitat. Ultimately, trying to put all that together into a conservation plan if that's the direction that is decided to go. So our detection methods, we used a lot of electrofishing, going at 3 to 4 days per week from April until November, and trying to sample for about an hour at each of our sites, trying to keep that sampling effort even across the sites. We also used some gill netting, which were 150-foot long floating gill nets that were trisected into 3 mesh sizes, 2, 2.5, and 3-inch mesh. And we started out by putting those out for about 3 hours around dusk and trying to check them every hour to reduce the mortality. But that kind of proved to be ineffective, so we started leaving the nets overnight, and that's when we began to encounter Mooneye. And finally, we used a citizen science portion of it. We know that anglers catch these fish. We're hoping to get some of those reports of where they're catching them, possibly how deep the water is, and what baits they're using. And trying to send us a photo so we can positively identify the Mooneye versus something that looks very similar to it. Just to give you an idea about our study sites, we have Flat Rocks, which is just upstream of Hubleton, which is just downstream from the impoundment. Eelweir, which is where the Oswegatchie and the Indian River converge right here, down to the Eelweir Dam, as well as Ogdensburg, which is just upstream from the dam that separates it from the St. Lawrence River. And one spot on the Indian River, which is separated by the natural waterfall, all the way down to the end of Black Lake. So it's connected right here to the north end of Black Lake. It's all one big river system. So we tried to get a population estimate. We were able to get 27 pit tags out, but we were only able to recapture 2 fish. So it's difficult to get an accurate population estimate off of that, but we did get some catch per unit effort results. So over our 2-year effort, we were able to encounter 55 fish, get 27 pit tags out with those 2 recaptures, and ultimately the electrofishing proved to be our most effective method, particularly at Ogdensburg. And Eelweir was just a challenge, whether it was electrofishing or gill netting. But we ended up with come up with 1 Mooneye every 7.5 hours or so. So they're tough to find. From each fish that we encountered, we did pull a scale off of it for aging. So this chart is showing our electrofishing and gill netting efforts in combination with Doug Carlson helped us in the spring of 2024 quite a bit with some gill netting. So we ended up with an average age of about 4.5 years, the oldest fish being about 8. That's what we came up with the scales. We looked a little bit at the difference between the electrofishing and gill netting because there was some bias there. The electrofishing showed some younger age classes. We came up with a couple of juvenile fish, but we're missing these older age class fish. The gill netting kind of complemented that. We ended up with some of the older fish in the gill nets, but missed those younger fish, probably because they are maybe going through the mesh if they're small enough. Anytime you have the gill netting, unfortunately, there is mortality, but it gave us a chance to look at the opercular bones and otoliths from those fish. And opercular bones were very similar to the scales. They were slightly younger. We ended up with a couple more 4-year-old fish. We missed some of these 6- and 7-year-olds, or they at least looked younger with the opercular bones. But we were very surprised when we got to the otoliths. The showed much older fish. This photo here by Scott Schluter, you can see pretty clearly at least 10 years in this otolith. And the previous record in New York was 8 years old for a Mooneye, and we counted a few that were over that, even as old as 12. So it brought our average age up to about 6.5 years. So just looking at those different aging methods, we can see that the scales showed younger class Mooneye, where the otoliths showed a greater distribution across those older age classes. Just looked a little bit at the sexual dimorphisms. The females did tend to be a little bit longer, also slightly heavier, and about a half a year older, just on average. Ended up with 26 males and 31 females, so our sex ratio is about 83.9. I know that's really surprising, but how did we tell them apart? The males have this pretty unique thumbprint shape. These are specialized scales near the anal fin to give it that feature. And this rounded portion of the anal fin. The females, it's pretty straight across, and you can see that thumbprint is missing. So if you end up with a fish like this, we can see that thumbprint pretty clearly here. Got the round fin. It's a boy. Habitat characteristics, we did look at this. We sampled at 20 randomly generated points at each site, and at every half a meter in depth we took these parameters, and we're still kind of picking through that data, looking for consistencies and where we did find the Mooneye and did not, so that information is still to come, but we are looking at it. The fish community, we tallied every fish that we saw along with the species, so we end up with a lot of smallmouth bass, walleye, red horse. And just by recording these fish, we kind of know that at least our sampling methods are working, and we're just not finding the fish that we're looking for. But 28 different species in total, and again, we're still looking for consistencies in the fish that are found with the Mooneye versus which aren't. So what we've come up with so far is that in the spring, they're very catchable in the cold and fast water. A lot of our encounters were during the early springtime. Up until about June, it just sort of shut off after that. It became very difficult to find. So we might need to adjust where we're looking for them in the river or survey methods. We tried to experiment with that a little bit our second year, and we didn't come up with much difference. We tried doing some gill netting on the bottom, using more gill netting versus the electrofishing, and they were still just very difficult to find. And that the otoliths indicate just an older population than the scales really opals do. So we're still looking for people to kind of maybe look at our otoliths just to give a second opinion on the scales. So if anybody's interested, just let us know. Next steps are to look at that habitat data. To continue the spring efforts in the spawning. It's very difficult to get on the fish in the right places at the right times. So there's still a lot of gaps in that spawning data. And the citizen science outreach has been very helpful to us. There's been a lot of good reports. There was one exciting encounter on the Indian River up near Theresa. So that is farther up than we previously thought that they could be. And just to keep expanding our distribution model, try to find new places where we're finding Mooneye. So a special thanks to Dr. Langen at Clarkson University, Scott Schluter from Fish and Wildlife Service, Doug Carlson for all of his field time and expertise, of course FEMRA for funding, and New York State DEC for their time and cooperation and expertise. So at this time, I'll take any questions.